Pilot Safety Institute is a nonprofit organization dedicated to reducing general aviation accidents by providing free and low-cost safety classes. Our speaker today is Gary Reeves. Gary has over 5,000 hours. He's an ATP, a Master CFI, II, and MEI. Gary is also an expert in Garmin avionics and ForeFlight. He has instructed over 200 students and is a Young Eagles flight leader. He's also the 2014 Long Beach District Instructor of the Year and FAA Safety Team Member of the Year. There are 97,000 flight instructors in the U.S. Less than 800 have ever been named Master Instructor. California only has 14. And now, please welcome from Big Bear, California, Gary Reeves.
Hi guys. Everybody should be seeing something on the screen at this point, just a big blank screen, but we're going to move on. If you have any questions at any time, please use the questions feature. It's a really big honor for me to introduce somebody who's joining me today on my webinar, and I tell him all the time, but I'll tell you all the same thing. The guy joining me tonight, absolutely one of my heroes. I grew up, as you'd say, getting my private pilot and instrument rating by reading his books. And he's got over 30 years of teaching, over 10,000 hours, 90% of which are dual instruction. He's been appointed a lifetime National Accident Prevention Counselor by the FAA. He's owned a Bonanza, a Turbo 210, and his current favorite airplane is a Cessna 150. He's actually spoken in every single state in the US as well as Europe. He's a columnist for Flight Training and AOPA. And as I said, he's probably best known for his really funny and easy to learn from books, as well as a brand new line of electronic or e-courses available to help people. What many of you may not know is he's actually probably the best well-known instructor in the world because he's the instructor in Microsoft Flight Simulator as well. Now, you need to be nice to the guy, as I always am, at least from a distance, because many of you don't know that my friend Rod Machado is not only a black belt in Hapkido, but also Taekwondo. So everybody, I hope at least at home to yourselves, you'll clap and join me in welcoming Rod Machado.
Thank you very much, Gary. That's a very nice introduction, very kind of you. And just as an addendum, that's actually 42 years of teaching. I started flight instructing back in 1973. So, and as far as the black belt, yeah, I know just enough moves to render myself helpless with ankle and muscle sprains, and it's something I've learned to be very cautious about as I get a little older. But pleasure, folks. Real pleasure to have you here. We're going to have a lot of fun tonight and hopefully learn a lot of very, very interesting things.
So I'd like to take just a minute out and talk about the FAA safety team. This will qualify you all for wings credit. You'll have to give me about 24 hours to 2 days to get you wings credits, but I certainly will. The FAA safety team is an all-volunteer organization. I happen to be a lead rep out of Orange County. But one of the most common misconceptions is that people come to me all over the country. You know, a lot of people come up to me in Oshkosh and Sun and Fun and say, you know, I'd like to be a safety rep too, but I'm not an instructor. Well, there was a guy named Robert Baker who got his private pilot at the age of like 62. I don't think he even had 300 hours total. And he did more for the FAST team in Southern California than any other lead rep instructor I know combined. And he didn't even have an instrument rating. So you don't have to be a flight instructor to make a difference in safety. And I hope you'll all consider joining. So I want to start this out. And just for tonight, we need to have some really clean, simple definitions so we can talk about. These are, you know, there's a lot of wiggle room on this, but I want to give you all some pretty simple definitions. Ground training, for tonight's purposes, is going to be defined as learning theory and skills before or after flight. In other words, all learning that occurs when the motor's not running. Flight instructing is going to be teaching theory or skills during the flight. So, Rod, would you like to tell everybody the difference between ground and flight instruction?
Sure, Gary. The act of giving ground instruction, just as you say, is done on the ground, and it covers essentials that most people I don't think they realize how valuable they are in terms of preparing a student to make and execute good decisions. And and specifically, it doesn't require a CFI certificate. Or I should say, a CFI be present while the ground instruction is occurring, and that's because it can be done by the student on his or her own interactively through books, through videos, and what have you. But flight instruction always requires a flight instructor.
Absolutely. So, Rod, I guess the question I first came up with you is I've noticed that you've started selling your textbooks, which have been very popular for years, now as ebooks and online, and I kind of wanted to know why the switch.
A couple reasons for that, Gary. One, people aren't reading regular books, in other words, physical books, as much as they were in the past. Ebooks have become very popular, and thus the popularity of e-readers, such as the Kindle Lite and iPad and so forth. People also like portability. And that gives them a chance to study almost, anywhere they want, quite frankly. And strangely enough, maybe it's not strange to people that actually do this, but the ability to read through scrolling and expanded text on your iPhone has increased. It's amazing how many people are actually reading EPUB type ebooks on their iPhone. So those are the main reasons. It just allows people to study anytime, anywhere they want without having to lug around a 650-pound textbook with them.
And that's true. And I actually came up across an interesting study that ebooks are becoming much, much more popular precisely for that reason. And another big reason I think ebooks are so popular for anyone who is an instructor or has taught for a long time, it's just becoming almost impossible to find an open pilot shop to get a textbook. So it's nice that you get that instant download.
Well, that's very true. Actually, at John Wayne Airport, I can remember a time we had 4 pilot shops at John Wayne Airport, a very, very, very big airport. And now that went down to 3, 2, 1. And the last one finally was, I guess was absorbed by the airport, and it disappeared about 3 months ago. And there are no pilot shops, not one pilot shop at John Wayne Airport now. And that's amazing. We have 3 big flight schools, no pilot shops.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to handle this slide, Rod. If you can adjust your mic a little bit, it's starting to get a little scratchy again. So
okay.
The biggest benefits that Rod and I were talking about from actually using his workbook, not his handbook. His workbook, if you don't know, is only available as an electronic book, and it's actually just a series of quizzes for each chapter. So one of the biggest benefits for the student is they get instant feedback from reading, which really makes it a much more interactive type of learning, which automatically makes it more effective. The biggest benefit for me as a CFI, and I actually use his book and his workbook for all of my students, is I guarantee that they've not only read the content because they have to turn in the quiz, but by asking them a couple questions on the quiz, I can guarantee the quality of it. So I know Rod's books present very high quality, but not only that, I know the students read the content because I see a completed quiz, and I actually guarantee some comprehension. So Rod, if you're with us, how's your mic now?
Gary, I think it should be fine. How does that sound?
Much better, perfect. So because I'm such a big fan of your quizzes, I thought I would quiz you. So this is Rod's chance to survive a quiz.
I'm ready and willing.
So Rod, which one do you think is more fun for the student, ground training or flight instruction?
Okay, and before I answer the question, let me mention one other thing. We won't just be talking about my products in this program. We'll be talking about other people's products too. We're just talking about my products now because I use them, Gary uses them, and they provide an instant reference. So which is more fun for the student? Let me take some time on this one, Gary. Flight instruction.
Winner!
I kind of thought so.
Which one do you think is more fun for the CFI?
Let me take some time on this one. Flight instruction, I would guess.
Absolutely.
Oh, excellent. I got that one right. It's good to get things right.
And there's a bonus. They get to build time that way.
Indeed.
Which one do you think is easier for the CFI?
Oh, flight instruction is much easier because that's what the CFI practice is doing. I got that one right too. Excellent.
There you go.
This is very novel.
Now here's the last and most important question. Which one of the two do you think is more important for safety?
Well, you're asking the psychology guy, so it's a good question, and with the caveat that upwards of 45% of all our aviation accidents are stick and rudder based, but the serious accidents, the really super serious ones, where decision and judgment come into play, that is actually a function of ground training.
Absolutely.
I can't believe I got that one right.
So I'd like to, if any of y'all have seen my presentations live or online before, I use a lot of quotes in mine, so I thought I would use a quote from somebody you might know. And Rod has said this several places and several times. To be successful, a new pilot needs 2 times more ground training than flight instruction.
Yes, and Gary, that's actually on an hour a per lesson basis. So one hour lesson, 2 hour ground training, and I know that's pretty much what you use in your schedule. Ground training is absolutely essential.
You know, I'll tell you, as somebody who regularly sends people to check rides, I have a pretty high success rate, but the examiners I know will tell me that most people who fail any check ride, private or other, actually fail in the oral, which is all based on ground training. So the FAA actually even agrees with us. There's something called the special emphasis areas that I'm sure you're all familiar with in the practical test standards. So let's see what the FAA thinks. Where do you think positive aircraft control is most effective to teach? It's going to be in flight.
Indeed.
And, you know, positive exchange of flight controls, I'm sure everybody here can agree it's going to be in flight. Now, stall spin awareness, Rod and I have talked that we kind of agree that ground is the most effective place to teach this, but there's an asterisk, there's a caveat. A student to not stall or come out of a stall quickly really needs to understand the theory and the science behind it. However, memorizing the acronym PARE, P-A-R-E, without actually undergoing true spin training in an airplane is pretty useless. It'll help them avoid the stall, but if you've never been in a spin, your chances of recovering are very low. And, you know, we have friends like Rich Stoll, who does upset training that we highly recommend every single person do. If you're an instructor that is not comfortable with spins, please do your students a favor and find somebody who is. I think I'm actually the only flight instructor at Long Beach that spins every single student, and I offer an acrobatic lesson with another instructor in a Robin. Rod, do you want to add anything to that?
I do, and thanks to Rich Stoll for coming up with the acronym PAIR for power, aileron, rudder, and elevator as a means of recovering from a stall. So it's just a very simple, easy to use technique. And ground instruction is good, just as you say, Gary. And what Rich says, and Rich has said in all his seminars, and he's the stall spin guy. He's the guy in the know, backed up by what NASA did many years ago in a 1974 study. To get the best of both worlds, you've got to have spin training. You've got to go up and you've got to spin an airplane, but you've got to have ground instruction too. You get both of those, then you, in essence, inoculate yourself from perhaps some of the most serious, well, from the most serious stall spin situations that you can get into. So both are essential, just as you say, and just as our buddy Rich advocates too.
Absolutely. I really think collision avoidance is best taught in a classroom with a practice scanning, telling people to fly with their lights on, covering on the maps all the common traffic frequencies, teaching people to get flight following. But it is reinforced in flight training. Wake turbulence, of course, hopefully is only taught on the ground. If you actually get into wake turbulence, it's probably not a good lesson.
Yeah, that would not be good at all. You know, considering that wake turbulence includes wingtip vortices as well as jet blasts, and that's very serious stuff. So it's probably one of the only things that one needs to be fearful of, because there's nothing you can do about it once you're in it. So, and by the way, folks, as Gary is presenting this, this is all leading up to how to use technology to teach these things.
Absolutely. Land and hold short operations, runway incursion avoidance, all of that is best taught on the ground, but then, of course, reinforced in flight. Aeronautical decision making and risk management can truly only be taught by using scenarios, which are a ground-based activity. Although you can do a couple in flight, it really has to come in the ground. And I even put ground as the most effective place to teach checklist usage. And I had a real specific reason for that. As flight instructors, our primary duty is to never not use a checklist, especially, well, for all phases of flight, because if you don't use a checklist every single time for a pre-flight and other phases of flight, students will skip as well. And I've got some stories of how I embarrassed myself by not using a checklist. So you teach it to ground on the demo flight. Don't do anything on the demo flight without an instructor. TFRs and special use airspace, again, are a ground-based lesson. Aviation security can really only be a ground-based lesson. And single pilot resource management being theory and using scenarios, again, ground. So if you look at the special emphasis areas and you talk to people who have failed private pilot, instrument, and commercial check rides, are usually lacking the ground training in most of the special emphasis areas.
Right, and Gary, one other thing too I might add about that is aviation risk assessment and decision making, as you say, is best taught on the ground, because the whole concept of how we think, how we make decisions, what we value, what we don't value. Do we value our safety more than we value being able to get home tonight versus arriving tomorrow after spending the night in a Motel 6, which is kind of like a Dixie dumpster with a checkout time. Sometimes people don't want to do that. So how do you make those values? And some things, absolutely some things have to be assessed in terms of risk assessment in the air. But and this is a common misconception among flight instructors, the vast majority of things for risk assessment and decision making can be taught on the ground, which falls into that category of areas of study where students can actually do on their own. And as everybody will see here, that's essential.
Absolutely. Rod, you might want to play with your mic just for a second, and I'll go through this slide. So Rod and I were talking, well, why don't most flight instructors teach more ground? And I think there's a kind of a stigma out there. A lot of young, low-time flight instructors are unfortunately working at schools where schools don't value ground, and they actually don't pay the instructor for ground time. They only pay them for flight time because they make more money on the rental airplanes. Another kind of stigma, and it's a very broad generalization, is that it doesn't build time. And I think that may be true for a lot of instructors. I only care about building time. I don't think that's probably true for anybody on this webinar or anybody watching this video, because you've already proven you have an interest in safety. But I think that's out there, and that's kind of a stigma. And Probably the biggest reason is that they're not trained to do ground. All of flight training through commercial and flight instructor focuses on flying the airplane with a very minimal amount of time teaching ground. And teaching ground is an entire different skill set, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And probably the biggest reason most flight instructors don't teach more and better ground because they don't have the tools. So ground training really requires three things. You got to have a classroom, you have to have expertise, and you have to have a really good quality curriculum. So Rod, why don't you talk about the tools they need to have a classroom?
You bet, Gary. And how is this sound now? Does that sound better?
The
How's
sound
everybody
quality
hearing?
is good, but it's a little soft. Can you turn up the volume?
Yeah. How about that? Does that sound okay?
Perfect. Okay, buddy, go
Good.
ahead.
Great. I fixed it because I hit it with my shoe, which is, and believe it or not, I was taking an instrument check ride one time with a lady by the name of Tig Pinnock, and many moons ago, and the localizer got stuck, and she essentially hit it with her shoe to get it unstuck. Didn't need an avionics technician to solve that problem. Um, what you need to be a good ground instructor. Sure, you can teach, or to teach ground school. You can teach ground school underneath the wing of an airplane. I've done it. Many people have done it. It's not the most conducive place to teach ground school, but you can do it. Realistically, if you're going to do it well, you need an environment that is conducive to teaching ground training. And that means having a blackboard, which is nice. And if you are really on a high end there, maybe you'll have PowerPoint slides and projector, and certainly a model airplane is essential. But it is also possible to do that without any of those things, just a pad or paper, pen, and iPad. Given all the tools that are available today, and we'll show you quite a few of those tools, and many of them are free, and we're going to provide them to you. You can do excellent ground instruction with again, the iPad, the e-learning courses that are available on the iPad, and so one has the tools but may not have even realized that they're available to them. So that's a good thing.
And another needed tool is really ground teaching requires quite a bit more training and expertise and experience, Rod. What would you say about that?
Actually, it does. It's one thing teaching people how to fly in an airplane because flight instructors are, very good at saying more right rudder, let go, I got it, and do you want to pay me now? The three essential elements of being a good flight instructor, and of course I jest, but that's what they do. So they're very good at teaching the behavioral skills, the motor, perceptual, and cognitive skills necessary to fly an airplane. But now you sit on the ground and you have to explain to your student what happens to the EGT when you switch from mags from both to left or right? And how does manifold pressure actually go down? Why does it go down when you pull the throttle all the way back and the butterfly cuts off the flow of air into the engine? Why? How? How does that work? Now, those are things that flight instructors know, but unless you have practice actually explaining those things, then they become rather difficult to teach. It takes as much skill being a good ground instructor as it does being a good flight instructor.
Great. And the last thing I'm actually going to cover, and Rod, hit your mic with a shoe again, buddy, is you need to have a really detailed curriculum. I think one of the most common mistakes nationwide is when I talk to especially independent contractor instructors, which I think is the way to go. I really am, that's what I've done all my career. And I say, well, what do you use for a curriculum? Well, I use the PTS. Well, the PTS is not a curriculum. If you want people to succeed, you have to have very detailed expectations of a ground lesson. And I'm going to look at lesson 3 on my curriculum. So what we're going to do on the ground is we're going to talk about an introduction to radio, weather basics, the ATIS, the ASOS, AWOS, and aviationweather.gov, and we're going to do a scenario, which teaches decision making, and that's the case study. Now, before we move on to the flight lesson, they need to have proved to me that they've done the reading, and I'll blow that up a little bit for you. The reading they have to do before we go out to the flight lesson, hopefully before they came for the ground lesson, is they need to read the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, and they need to have read Rod Machado's Chapter 3, brought me a quiz. Also, they need to bring me a certificate of completion from the free AOPA Say It Right. And I gotta tell you, as part of my private pilot curriculum and my instrument curriculum, I require students to do all of the free Air Safety Foundation classes and bring me that certificate.
Gary, what you do is actually very, very interesting because you're participating in something called responsibility-based education. And in order for a person to, in order to ensure that somebody completed the ground training that you assigned, they bring you a completed quiz or they bring you a certificate, and that is extremely important because what it does is it inserts another, well, let's say calibration tool that gets the student to think, my gosh, I've got to do this. I don't have that certificate. I got to get it because Gary's not going to fly with me if I don't. And it's like one of my instructor friends has his students text him, literally text him, the moment that student completes the required ground training, the homework that that student was assigned. And the student doesn't have to do that. The instructor doesn't have to make him do that. But what this does is it further ensures, just like you're doing here, completion of the homework, which is essential for the flight instructor's job.
Absolutely. And you can see as part of a curriculum, all of the interactive learning and some online technology is absolutely used. So, Rod, what do you think the answer is for flight instructors that don't have the tools?
Well, if a flight instructor doesn't have the tools, he needs to get them for the. You're talking about the tools of the traditional
To do
classroom.
good ground instruction. If they don't
Right.
have their own detailed curriculum, if they don't have necessarily a good place to teach, what do you think the best lesson or the best answer for their students would be?
Well, the best answer is to get the student to do a lot more ground training on their own through guided self-study with educational technology. Given the amount of and the absolutely stellar tools that are available for pilots, students in training to teach themselves, and as we said, the in that left-hand column right there, all those essential things from wingtip vortices, risk assessment, and so on are all in the ground study category. And this is where the student can self-educate himself or herself on their own, leaving the flight instructor to just ensure that that occurred and teaching the student then how to apply that in an airplane.
Absolutely. So, and that's what really tonight is all about. So, Rod, how effective is e-learning compared to reading a book?
Well, traditionally, it's very effective because again, it's e-learning. Let's take your typical e-learning course where you watch a video or you participate in some sort of interactive demonstration on a screen, and then e-learning is always reinforced through the asking of questions, and this is all objective based. If you get it wrong, if it's a good e-learning program, it'll return you to the course to restudy the part that you missed so that you eventually get 100%. So in other words, it ensures 100% effective information transfer. If it's a traditional e-learning program, it's a lot less too, because if I spend, let's say, as a student, if I spend 2 hours having an instructor talk to me about airspace, and I'm paying 50 to 75 dollars an hour, that's a chunk of change. Here I can buy an e-learning course on many of the different and websites, Sporties, Bold Method, I have them. AOPA offers quite a few. And also, good point, reduces training time by about 50%. And that's because the instructor, in this case, may not have the most completely focused presentation. He doesn't have to get up to go for a cup of coffee, and you get more effective training.
Absolutely. Rod, hit your mic with a shoe. I actually found a study as well from the Research Institute of America. Oh, let's go the other way here. Sorry about that. And the Research Institute of America did a big public survey, and they found that e-learning is much more effective than just reading a book, increased the retention by up to 60%. And it's, again, more cost efficient and effective. I'll tell you all, for me, I have for 8 years had a curriculum that required people to read, and I had a pretty good pass rate on the written test, but a couple people fail, um, because I have no way of knowing if they read it, or even if they did read it, and I believe people, I'm pretty trusting, I don't know if they comprehend it. Since I've started adding scenarios and a quiz from Rod to every chapter, I now have a 100% pass rate for my students who take a written test. And I will tell you, I actually am a written test center supervisor. I own a testing center. And I will absolutely tell you, when people fail a written test and I ask, well, how did you study? They always say, I read the GLIME. Reading the GLIME is awesome. I love GLIME, but it doesn't ensure comprehension. And that's why assigning people quizzes, even if you make them up yourself, is really, really important. So let's
By
talk
the way,
about, yeah, Rod.
I was going to mention something here. Hopefully this mic is working. This is the worst $7 I've ever spent on a microphone. And no, actually, it's a $600 microphone, so it should be working better. Gleim is excellent for what Gleim does, and that is they have excellent written test practice uh, uh, booklets that are very, very effective, and I recommend them, as well as a few others, to my students. So you are absolutely right on that. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I used Lime and the ASA preps for all of mine as well.
Yeah,
But
ASA and Sporties also offers excellent physical written test booklets.
mhm. So the probably the best learning benefits for the students is what Rod and I have talked about. E-learning guarantees quality and content. Obviously, we've discussed that it's going to save the student a lot of money. It's much more convenient and flexible than having them come to like a community college ground school, which is where I did, and I think they're excellent, or coming to the airport. And the biggest benefit is that students expect it. And Rod, why do you think students expect e-learning today?
Yeah, that's a great question because they're called millennials. The young folks, if we're talking about young folks, and let's just talk about anybody under 30, they expect the type of training they have to comport with probably the type of training they experienced in college, and that is electronic-based training. Certainly, PowerPoint presentations, and with their iPads and iThingies, whatever they happen to be, they're using programs, probably connecting right to the school server, downloading quizzes and so on. That's a very, very important thing to do. By the way, just as an aside, I have to tell you this. I gave a speech at UND, and it was a 2-hour program. This was a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I walk up on stage, and the gentleman in charge of technology, a young kid, comes up and says, "Where's your PowerPoint disk or your thumb drive?" And I said, "I don't have one." He looked at me like a dog looking at a fan. And he said, "What do you mean you don't have one?" I said, "I don't have one." He said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to stand up here and I'm going to talk to everybody for 2 hours." And that was completely incomprehensible to him. So, indeed, young folks, and particularly those under 30, expect that type of technology.
Rod, the sound quality is much clearer, but you are pretty soft if you can turn the volume up. I'll give you a second to do that. And let's talk about the guided self-study e-learning benefits for the flight instructor. Well, it makes the flight instructor more money. Now, wait a minute. I charge by the hour, and all of my lessons are 3 hours. How am I possibly going to make more money by spending less time with the student on the ground?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something I just wrote on the CFI discussion forum and also on my Facebook site. I spent a lot of time discussing this. And here's how it works. Ultimately, we want the student to pay we want the student to pay as little as possible, but as much as necessary for their flight training, and so does the student. And the student, let's say, would pay traditionally anywhere from $9,000 to, believe it or not, $18,000 for some courses, private pilot training courses at FBOs. Okay, so let's say it's $10,000. That's what the FBO is saying it's going to cost for so many hours of flying time. Well, if the instructor, as an example, and just take it as the example, and I'll use the extreme example here. Let's say the instructor is going to spend 40 hours with the student, 40 hours total flight time with that student, 40 billable hours. And the student is going to pay a total of $10,000 ultimately for the private pilot certificate. If there was a way that the instructor could spend less physical time training the student so that the student has less instructor involvement, let's say, but doesn't pay more than $10,000, then the instructor could charge, let's say, 25% more, maybe even 50% more for each hour of flight if that instructor were more effective and more efficient at being able to train that student. So instructors say, how can I charge more money per flight lesson? The answer is reduce the amount of time you have to spend with the student, but make that time more effective through using now the methods of e-learning and all the different electronic resources that are available to you to help educate that student. And therefore you can raise your rate, student doesn't pay more money overall, you get more money and everybody's happier and the student gets a good education.
And I'll tell you just from my personal experience, folks, this is 100% true. As a two-time master instructor, the lowest amount I charge ever anybody is $80 per hour. Most of the time I'm $100 per hour. And I flat out tell people when they come in, if they want to do a private pilot with me or one of my instructors, that is every lesson is a minimum of 3 hours. We charge for all of our time, and it will cost them $13,000 to $15,000 at a minimum unless they study. And what I found over the years is that the people who study end up finishing in 50 hours or so and pay us for all 36 lessons. The people who don't study typically quit early, and that's why the flight instructor loses so much money, because they have a high turnover. So having a student be more successful and you being able to charge a little bit more for your time, but being more efficient, really does make a huge difference. And
Right.
there is another way the instructors can make a little bit of money, and how's that, Rod?
Before I actually answer that question, keep in mind that one of the basic tenets of psychology is we teach other people how to behave and act towards us. So when an instructor says, well, my student doesn't do his homework, well, what you're telling me is that you, a flight instructor, they can change a person's behavior in an airplane and take him ab initio from no flight skill whatsoever to a trained private pilot. You can teach him how to fly, but you can't teach him how to do homework. And it's still the same thing. It's still the same applied psychological principles, teaching students how to do homework. And so therefore making it easy on them is one way to do that, as we've talked about and we'll talk about in more detail here shortly. So very important to do that homework. But anyway, how flight instructors can make more money, one way is I've created an affiliate program so that any flight instructor can go to my website, sign up in the affiliate program, and make 25% on every product that their student purchases. And you just have to download a link that becomes your personal link, have the students go to that link to order any products, and you could purchase my private pilot program, which is $199 digital download, and you get $50 payable at the end of every month. And it's a good program, and people seem to enjoy it, and I do not mind paying people to do that to help people introduce people to my products.
So there are a lot of free electronic tools. And Rod, you want to talk about this one from Bold Method?
Bold Method is a great site, and I was searching around their site a while back. Those folks over there are very clever, and they have some great videos, and they do a lot to inspire aviation. This is one example of a free CFI tool that Bold Method applies. Now, this you can take the link, put it on your iPad or whatever your iThingy, and bring it out to demonstrate how the the forces of lift and the horizontal component of lift changes in flight. This is excellent, and it's interactive. So this is one you should look at. And Bold Method has, I believe, three or four different free CFI tools.
And there are a lot of free e-learning things. We will, of course, talk about a couple of Rod's products just because they're so effective. But the majority of these tools we're showing you will be free for CFIs, and it makes a huge difference to show things visually versus trying to explain theory over, a table in Starbucks.
Oh, absolutely.
Here's another free tool, and this one's from you.
Right. I have 13 free interactive e-teaching sliders or CFI tools that are available for flight instructors. You can go to my website, rodmachado.com, click on the CFI Onlys tab, and see a place for affiliate sign up, but also for CFI tools. This is one of them, and it shows the angle of attack variation and the airspeed change in flight. It's a very important concept for students to understand to be able to do slow flight well and land an airplane well.
Hello, folks. This is Rod Machado. If you're like me, and I know I am, then you enjoy learning, especially when learning is fun. Well, if you like to learn and want to learn a lot about airspace,
and that particular tool, that is an interactive e-learning course of which I have 3 now, and one is on airspace, one is on aerodynamics, and the other one is on cross-country flight planning. And that is available. I think those are $14.95 on my website. In the airspace course, and this is one of the free CFI tools that are downloadable. This is a variations in Class E airspace shapes slider, and it allows the student to see how a Class E surface-based controlled airspace varies in different parts of the country. And that's kind of an unusual example right there, Delta County. And it's good to know why they or how they vary, and keeps the student from being surprised.
That's a really unique echo area. That's pretty cool. So at this point, let's just take some questions for Rod or for me if you have any at this point. And I've been saving a couple. This is from Daniel Gomez. Hey, Dan. Gary, what would you say to CFIs that are urged by the chief flight instructor to focus on flight training instead of ground training? Now, I can be flip, and honestly, I think I'm funny. Not everybody does. My instant response would be to teach somewhere else. But that's a very delicate position. When you're an employee and a chief flight instructor is giving you a directive, that's sometimes very challenging. I would probably, as gently as I could, suggest that the students would do better and less people would drop out if we did ground training, or maybe even do, because you can't do ground training outside of the 141. I really think the guided self-study, even if you had to kind of be sly about giving your students the guided self-study tools, that would make a huge difference. Rod, do you have anything for that?
Yes, I do. The answer to the question is just as you said. If the chief pilot wants you to focus more on flight training, fine. That's fine. He or she didn't say you couldn't do ground training, but the point there is that if you use the e-learning based tools, the interactive learning, the videos, the computer-based quizzes that are available, and all these tools are available to you, then since self-study, ground training is guided self-study, you don't really have to be involved except issuing the request to complete these particular homework assignments. You just need to know where the tools are. So in that sense, it's really a moot point. It doesn't really matter whether you teach that much ground training, because somebody else can do it for you, or at least assist you in the process.
Absolutely. Rod, get your shoe out again. And there's a follow-up question from Russell. Hi, Russell. Did you say you cannot give ground training outside of Part 141? What I mean by that, Russell, is that 141 is very much document. You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. So if you do extra ground that's not in the curriculum at the 141, you may have problems with the employer, or they may not pay you. There's lots of other issues, but you can always meet a student for coffee. But again, I don't believe in flight instructors giving away their knowledge for free. That's why we like the guided self-study, which we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. Natasha Flaherty, I'm sorry if I messed that one up. Hi, Natasha. I thought that a big emphasis of the CFI, CFII checkrides were that the examiner reviews your syllabuses and picks a few ground lessons and says, teach this to me. Natasha, that's actually just a very small part, and nowhere in CFI training are you ever really taught how to use and create the tools and use and create a curriculum. Although pre-bought curriculums like Jeppesen and others, and Rod actually has one, are very good. I never thought the pre-bought curriculums were as good as something customized for the local area. Andrew. Hi, Andrew. You mentioned earlier that many instructors don't have the skills for ground instructions. Often students are guided in the direction of computer-aided training like King Schools, Jeppesen, Sporty's, Machado, etc. Expert ground instructors presented in videos that saves the student money, but it doesn't help developing the ground instructing skills for the CFI. And you're right. It's all about guided self-study as the key to success. And unfortunately, Andrew, really the only way instructors can get better at teaching is through experience. And there are a lot of actually online classes to improve your teaching skills. Rod, do you have any tips for making an instructor better?
Yeah, I certainly do, Gary. And Andrew, that's an interesting question. Number one, not all flight instructors want to be good ground instructors. And when I say good ground instructors, I want to qualify that. Not all flight instructors want to spend the time doing ground training, and therefore, by definition, they don't get the practice training and developing ways of saying things that make them effective as a good ground instructor. And a good example of that, for 6 years, starting back in 1975, I taught an accelerated ground school, weekend ground training. And I had to figure out a way to convey difficult concepts in a short period of time. And I developed a VOR presentation as an example that allows me to convey the concepts of how to use a VOR and how to make sense of it, how to interpret it in about 10 to 15 minutes. I can make that presentation and it'll have almost 100% positive behavioral change with the student in terms of using VOR. And it's how I say things, the things I leave out, what I don't say, and the way I introduce things. That's what ground instruction is all about. And as one more aside, if one wanted to make a great deal of money as a flight instructor, assuming you have the supply of students in your area, teaching a ground school, just use the curriculum in the back of my private pilot workbook. A 2-day ground school, a 2-day-a-week ground school, 3 hours a night, Tuesdays and Thursdays, for 9 weeks. You can convey all the basic material that a student needs to understand, let's say, to function as a private pilot. And you can do it and charge a reasonable amount of money for it. Out here in California, they charge $360 for that 9-week ground school. And they don't seem to be short on the supply of students. And here's the interesting thing. Nobody does it. Nobody does anything like that. Any instructor that wants to do that is interested in making money will find that to be a great source of revenue. And it's a great way to get a lot of students, more than you can ever handle.
Right. We're going to move on, folks. We do have several hundred people online today. If I don't answer your question, it's only because out of respect for people's time that we need to finish on time. If we don't answer your question, feel free to email us after, and I'll give you those instructions. The only one I want to touch on real quick is Dave, and I'm sorry I'm going to mess this up. I'm going to say Cicchino or Cicchino. And Dave brings up a really good point. The flight instructor provides real experience that they don't get in the e-learning. And Dave, you're right, but if they don't have the basis of good ground learning first, a lot of that real experience is lost. But no matter how good the ground and the self-guided study is, if the flight instructor doesn't share those valuable lessons, and especially through scenarios and telling stories on yourself, that it's kind of a loss. Let's move on. And Rod, I'll let you ask me a couple questions.
You bet, Gary. And one of the questions that I decided to ask you is, what about using educational technology during flight training, such as, well, iPads or iThingies or tablet devices?
Well, and most people, when they think educational technology during flight training, I think everybody really, expects that an iPad is used. And an iPad is important during flight training. I require from, pretty much lesson one, that private pilots bring and use iPads during flight. And there are some really good reasons for that. An iPad makes a pilot much, much safer. It's much better at everything than humans, with a really critical caveat: if they know how to use it. And we'll talk about that later. But let's start out with talking about iPads, because I think that's the most common thing.
So would iPads be better than buying, let's say, your typical general aviation charts?
Well, I'm going to say absolutely, because you probably can't find an open pilot shop.
Not with any pilot shop at John Wayne Airport.
Now, I
You'd
will
have to.
tell you that I still carry paper backups, and Sporty's, one of my favorite pilot shops, actually has a subscription service. You give them your credit card, and they mail you new paper charts before they come out. A lot of people don't know that. But it's really critical, and one of the biggest reasons I think iPads are so much better than paper charts is because they're always current. Now, a terminal chart, being a VFR product, changes every how often, Rod?
Every 6 months for a terminal chart.
Poor Rod didn't know I was going to, publicly test all of his knowledge. And
We're being tested all the time. So
and what's interesting is that, Rod, every time the FAA reprints terminal charts, they make an average of 100 changes. And I can't tell you how often in the LA terminal chart, tower frequencies have been changed, common traffic frequencies have been changed, airspace has changed, VORs have been added or removed. A sectional, of course, being VFR, also every 6 months. And every time they reprint the sectionals nationwide, there's an average of 278 changes. Now, Rod, an AFD, contrary to what most people think, is primarily an IFR product. And all IFR products expire?
Let's see, 56 days, if I'm not mistaken.
Woohoo! We're going to have to get you a trophy. And folks, every time they reprint the AFDs, they make an average of 825 changes. Terminal procedures don't change a whole lot. There's only about 75 changes every time they reprint. But if you throw in the low altitude and the high altitude charts, that's a total of 1,361 important things to flight safety that you're missing if you're a month out of date. That's why I think iPads are so much better, because it's easier to keep them current.
Okay, and now that you talk about currency, what about the FAA requirements for pre-flight, Gary?
Well, what's really interesting is a lot of people don't know this. A standard weather briefing is legally required for every single flight if you leave the traffic pattern. So Rod and I are friends. We live fairly close to each other in Southern California, and the flight time from John Wayne to Long Beach is 6 minutes if you go slow. And a lot of people will go from their airport to a local airport without getting a standard weather briefing, and that's actually illegal. You are
Yeah, and
required.
by the way, just as an aside, it's six minutes in a regular airplane. It's about 30 minutes in a 150.
See that?
But
I think that's why you like the 150. That's how you got those 10,000 hours.
yeah, more time. That's funny. I like that.
But FAR 91-103 actually requires that every pilot in command shall, before every single flight, become familiar with all available information, which means they need to have all the information on a chart and all the information in AFD, as well as a standard weather briefing if they're leaving their local area.
Yeah, and this is one of my favorite questions. Can iPads be legally used as a means of replacing paper charts?
Well, the FAA actually became pretty clear that in 1997. And just so you all know, that the FAA cannot and will never ask you to show them a chart on a ramp check, because they can't. There is no FAA policy requiring you to have a current chart for most pilots. In fact, only a few pilots are legally required to carry current charts, and that's 9150 large or multi-engine airplanes only, with the exception if you're going through a special flight rules area. Are you required to have a current chart in the airplane? Even more interesting is handheld GPS receivers, and that's what iPads are. They're a handheld GPS receiver. Is a non-issue because the units are never going to be approved or required for flight. The FAA will never certify any handheld device for legal use in instrument conditions because it's not possible for them to inspect or control 2 million iPads. So the FAA will never approve an iPad because it's not required for flight because they can't control it. So I hope everyone feels better about that. But wait, there's just a little bit more. Now remember, the FAA cannot ask you on a ramp check to see a current chart. However, if an out-of-date chart, no chart, or an out-of-date database in a handheld device contributes to the condition causing an FAA investigation, it could be used in further enforcement. So what that means is they're never going to ask you for a chart on a ramp check. However, if you violate somebody's airspace, or you have any type of pilot deviation or any type of small accident, they will then demand that you prove you had all these charts with you, or you could be facing much more severe additional penalties because now they've proven that you violated 91-103. And I'm going to do a quick shout out to the world's newest commercial pilot, Marty Tan. One of my students just passed her initial check ride in Chino, and she'll be watching this later. So everybody, please silently at home clap at the computer, and we'll congratulate her.
Congratulations, Marty.
So the short answer about the legality of iPads is yes, iPads are legal if you can prove the charts are current, but iPads can be much more dangerous and cause more problems than paper charts.
Yeah, and that's another very interesting point. So tell us, what is the big danger of using an iPad in flight?
Well, one of the most common, and it actually is a result of the biggest danger, but one of the most common problems I've seen, because I travel the country, I teach ForeFlight and FlyQ and Garmin avionics all over the country, is this is the same problem we had with G1000. I was flying with a guy who kept pointing down at his iPad at low altitude after takeoff from Long Beach, going, "Gary, there's a plane. Gary, there's a plane." And he keeps pointing at his iPad. And I said, "He's red." And he goes, "No, he's yellow. Look at the yellow dot. Look at the yellow dot." And I'm like, "No, he's red." He goes, "No, it's a yellow dot." And I actually grabbed his head and turned it and showed him the giant red biplane that went over us by about 100 feet. iPads and G1000 traffic displays are actually a big danger because people don't know how to use them. It tells you where to look outside. It shouldn't be focused on. And that's true with all glass panel systems, is people just staring down at that instead of looking out the big front window.
Indeed. And Gary, one of the big problems that you know is the Cessna, or I should say U.S. Air Force, says on a 17-second VMC scan cycle, 14 seconds are outside, 3 seconds are inside. So that really does reinforce the issue of using the iPad for, as you said in one of your seminars, you get the information that you need from the iPad, and then take that and look outside and use it. And which I thought was a very, very clever statement. So give me another example of iPad problems.
Well, I got to tell you, there's about 10 or 12 problems that we're having all over the country, but all of these iPads are caused by one core deficiency, and that is people don't know how to use them. The biggest danger with iPads is 90% of all pilots and instructors in the U.S., I promise you, don't know actually how to use the iPad correctly and their software, and it's causing huge problems all over the country. I interviewed an FAA inspector about iPads, and I'm such a big fan of iPads, and I've been teaching iPads for a long time. I go, man, aren't these things great? And he goes, no, I hate them. He goes, all of the FSDOs hate these things because now that people are using iPads, they're showing an increase of 10 times the per month pilot deviations directly caused by the iPads. iPads are, we don't have the proof yet, but we can see the trend. iPads are causing an increase in controlled flight into terrain accidents. They're causing an increase in near misses, and I guarantee they're causing an increase in mid-air collisions. But the FAA, the average inspector to FSDO, absolutely hates these things because they're writing 10 times more pilot deviations than they ever had before. And it all goes back to the people just not knowing how to use the things. So Rod, I'm going to ask you a question. The G1000 airplane, fairly complex glass panel system. It has flight planning, georeference maps, and for y'all who don't know, georeference means you get the little blue moving airplane. Taxi diagrams, weather, and traffic displays. Rod, would you ever take a really good private pilot who learned in your Cessna 150, put them in a G1000 airplane and say, watch a couple YouTube videos online and you can figure it out while you fly?
No. Short answer, no. Long answer, which is a little bit less longer, and that is one FBO requires 20 hours of ground training and flight training to be considered proficient in a G1000 or 2000 for their airplanes. So no. No,
And I'm kind of preaching to the choir because, we've got several hundred people online. Most of you are instructors or studying to be instructors. And I know because you've expressed an interest in safety by being here, nobody would recommend that somebody try and figure out the G1000 in flight while doing that. But Rod, an iPad mini is a very complex glass panel system. It has flight planning, georeference maps, taxi diagrams, weather, and traffic. And 99% of people who get these glass panel systems take no training with an instructor at all. And that's why we're having such a huge increase in pilot deviations, airspace violations, near mid-air collisions. We're having huge problems because people don't equate them. And I'll tell you, I'm a huge fan of several electronic flight bags. My favorites are FlyQ and ForeFlight. I will tell you the training time it takes me, and I'm a two-time master instructor. I've been a ForeFlight expert since things came out. It takes me longer to make somebody safe and proficient at ForeFlight in flight than it does a G1000 airplane. They have to get training, but most people just don't.
Yeah, and Gary, can I add to that
Sure.
one thing for you too? And that's a great point. Um, the, uh, um, the real issue in using, well, as an example, I use WingX Pro and FlyQ, and I really do like those things. And your comment again comes back, and I hope everybody got that, and that is you take what you need and then exclude everything else from the iPad, and that's very important. And it's a friend of mine who is a captain on a 777, Al Engelhardt, many years ago. I asked him, I said, Al, how do they declutter, or what means of declutter do they have for the screens on your 777? He said, well, there is no declutter button because it's already decluttered for you. In other words, you only get the information you need, and that's not necessarily so on your G1000 equipment, or for that matter, your iPad. So your words should be listened to very carefully there.
Thanks, Rod. So a lot
Okay,
of
so Mike,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I get so excited by talking about these things. I forgot to ask you the next most important question. Which one is best? Because I mentioned I used WingX Pro and FlyQ. Which one do you prefer?
Well, and I want to preface this is absolutely a Gary opinion only. And I actually think then the four big players are FlyQ, WingX, Garmin Pilot, and ForeFlight. And I actually think they're all the best, but they all kind of do the exact same thing. All of the programs out there, do flight planning, weather information, airport information, instrument plates, and do georeference mapping. They all kind of do the same information. Some have more features, some do different features, but you all need to understand that all electronic flight bags out there do the same basic purpose, and that's to make a glass panel affordable for everybody's airplane. But they really are all the best. It just depends on the user. For example, if you use Android, the best program out there is WingX because it's the only major player that works really well on Android. And I like WingX. I have another master instructor, Mike Jesh, that teaches with WingX. It's a fairly complex program and it takes quite a bit of time to learn, but it's very powerful. But it's the best of the best if you use an Android. Now, if you have an all Garmin plane, you got a G1000 plane with every bell and whistle, I really do think the best program for you would probably be Garmin Pilot. I will preface this by saying I have nothing but Garmin stuff in my plane. I love Garmin. I am actually rolling out an 8-hour DVD series in 2 weeks, all about the Garmin 430 with interactive online courses. I do not believe in my heart that Garmin Pilot is the best program on the iPad. However, I do know it's the best at interfacing with Garmin avionics. So if you create a flight plan in Garmin Pilot, it is the best at actually automatically transferring up to the G1000 and other Garmin equipped planes. Now, if you're a professional pilot and you're doing hard IFR in and out of busy Bravo and Charlie airspace all day and all night, my personal favorite is 4Flight, and I've loved these guys for years. I will tell you, however, that 4Flight is the most complicated program. It has the most features. It takes the longest to learn to be safe and good at it. And most of the features that 4Flight have are really only best used by professional pilots who need these things. I think it's amazing. And I will tell you, when I fly hard IFR in and out of Bravo airspaces and stuff like that, that I still have 4Flight and I still like it. However, the easiest to learn out of all of them, and that actually makes it the safest for 90% of general aviation pilots, especially new students, is FlyQ. A perfect example is on 4Flight. I'm flying along and I need something, a piece of information about the airport. So I touch the airport, then I touch the airports tab, then I select the airport, then I touch the frequencies tab, write down the frequencies, and then I touch the weather tab. Well, that's great, and I'm very fast at it because I'm a pro at this program. FlyQ, if I touch an airport twice anywhere on the map, it automatically pops up with the current weather and all of the frequencies, and even draws a green wind area across an airport diagram so I know where the winds are coming from. So for 90% of pilots, especially students and people who don't fly high, fast, hard IFR stuff, I really think FlyQ is much better and it's much safer because it's so much easier to learn. Now, it won't do your weight and balance and it won't get an expected IFR clearance. You kind of got to go around it and do other stuff like that. But most people don't need that. They need simple and easy.
So, Gary, what do you think? Do CFIs need training to teach with iPads, or is this something they can learn on their own?
Well, Rod, do you think CFIs need training before they teach in a G1000?
Question with a question, my friend. Your game is deep. Of course they do. Absolutely.
Right. I really, truly believe that instructors, they need to have experience in training in a G1000 before they teach G1000. There's an instructor at my local airport, Long Beach, who has zero time, maybe 10 or 15 hours in a G1000, and yet she promotes herself as a G1000 instructor and recruits people to fly the G1000 airplanes. And I don't think that's serving the public. You really do need special training to teach advanced technology, because although all airplanes fly the same, you want to go up, you add power. You want to go down, you reduce power. They all work the same. I don't care if I'm flying the Premier Jet or Rod's 150. but the
Well, I,
technology is
I
significantly different.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Gary. Yeah, in the Cessna 150, the going up part is speculative. So just want to make sure that was on record.
Okay. So, which, and people ask me all over the country, well, what's the best to teach with? Well, the best to teach with is probably the simplest to learn. And that's why I think FlyQ is probably the best answer, especially for student pilots. And, people ask me, well, can you give me an example? I go, well, yeah, not a problem. One of the neat things about FlyQ, and this is not in flight, FlyQ actually has a built-in simulator so that you can show students landmarks they'll fly over and what their GPS will look like before they go on a cross-country flight. And that's one thing ForeFlight yet does not yet have. And that's why I really like FlyQ for teaching students not only in the ground, but you can preview the flight before. And I used to actually, and I do actually recommend a really interesting e-learning free website, Google Earth. I actually show a Google Earth picture of airports that they've never been to on their cross country, and it really helps. This makes it even better. And the other example I give people is I say, well, listen, I sell DVDs to fund our volunteer group. And to be really good at ForeFlight, I'm more than happy to sell you 2 DVDs for $179 that are over 7 hours of training. I also have a FlyQ DVD to be really good at is about 90 minutes. And I think that's the best testimonial. It just takes so much less time to learn. I'm not saying ForeFlight's not awesome, and I'm not saying WingX is not incredible, and Garmin is very good at certain things. They're all good, but honestly, I think the best to teach with would be the easiest to learn because they have other things to worry about rather than trying to figure out a complex program.
And one of the questions I get a lot, and I know you get this a lot, Gary. It's a very, very common question. Can you use these things on your check ride? In other words, to what extent will an examiner allow you to, let's say, deviate from the planned cross country to another airport by picking up your iPad and then drawing and pulling a course line and going somewhere else, just using the iPad?
Well, what's interesting is I actually went through examiner training in Oklahoma City, and my application's in, and hopefully one day soon somebody will call and say, hey, Gary, you're an examiner. As of a couple years now, FAA examiners are required to accept an iPad on check rides. They are required to allow you to use it. But every time I've ever sent a student for a check ride with an iPad, the examiner, about 10 minutes into the flight, turns it off and goes, power failure, now what? I will tell you on an ATV check ride, I'm kind of a smart guy, and I think I'm funny. I said, not a problem. I pulled out my iPhone, and the examiner let me fly the rest of the check ride using my iPhone as a moving map, because boom, I got a backup. But you need to make sure your students always carry paper backups, and they know how to work them, because the examiners are required to let you use an iPad, but they will absolutely turn it off in flight because that's a common problem with iPads turning off in flight. So do iPads really make it better? Yes. Everyone here on tonight's call, or if you're watching this as a recording, you do an incredible disservice if you're not teaching iPads, because iPad technology is better and more accurate than anything humans can do. Computers are always better at things if you know how to use them. Let's talk about collision avoidance. You have a better chance of avoiding mid-airs if you have ADS-B traffic alerts. Even partial alerts, because you're not ADS-B out, are always better than nothing if you use them correctly. When you got a little blue moving airplane moving up the taxi diagram, and don't forget, folks, you are required legally to have an open taxi diagram out that must be current whenever you taxi at a towered diagram or a towered airport. And everyone goes, oh, Gary, that's new. And I go, no, that's 91-103. That's never changed. You're required to have a taxi diagram out every time you move an airplane at a towered airport. Well, hey, iPads automatically change. to a taxi diagram, and they're georeferenced, and they'll give you visual and oral warnings when you get close. iPads are much better at allowing people to make better aeronautical decision making and risk management, because the more information you have, the more chances you have to stop the flight. And that's really my key to survival. My key to survival in an airplane is I cancel a lot of flights. I cancel a lot of flights after I take off, and I cancel even more flights before I ever get to the airport, because I have the information to show me it's not going to be a safe flight. You are much better at avoiding TFRs and special use airspace like MOAs and restricted airspace if you got the little blue moving plane. And again, there's problems when people don't know how to use them, but especially single pilot resource management. So I think everyone will agree that the practical test standards pass or fail is based on these special emphasis areas more than anything else. And an iPad is better at all of them. I promise you it's easier to use an iPad than to fold and refold a paper chart and pull out a plotter in flight.
And Gary, just to support your, well, all your points, but one of your first points, and that is ADSB, the value of that, or TIS or TAS in an airplane. The after 43 years of teaching people how to fly, people have not gotten better. In fact, they've gotten much worse at scanning for traffic during flight. It's almost an impossible thing to expect that a student is going to scan properly for traffic, much less a highly experienced pilot too. So I've come to this through a lot of personal angst, but I feel that without ADSB, TIS, or TAS in an airplane, a person is put at at a great disadvantage, and other people are put at great disadvantages too. So very valuable thing with iPads and that service.
Thanks, Rod.
So are there other educational technologies that students can use and pilots can use during flight training?
Absolutely. And there's a lot of really good stuff out there that does not require an iPad. I just think they should be required for every pilot. But I'm also not willing to buy everybody in America a free iPad. But there are some other really cool educational technologies during flight training that can make a huge difference. And my two favorites is Cloud Ahoy. Cloud Ahoy is this amazing program. All flight instructors should be using this, because debriefing with Cloud Ahoy is so much more effective than just talking over a table. And I'm going to show that. And an amazing free resource is the brand new website from Lockheed Martin. Everybody knows you can call 1-800-WX-BRIEF, but they have an amazing new website, and it's not even all that new, 1-800-WXBRIEF.com, that is amazing as a teaching tool. Let's talk about Cloud Ahoy, and I've been using Cloud Ahoy for years, and the guy that invented it is an amazing guy named Chuck, and his wife is amazing. And this is a real small family organization, and I think it's like $39 a year. It's absolutely nothing. But what you do is you turn on Cloud Ahoy on your iPhone or iPad, you run it in the background, and it actually records a GPS track that you can then replay after the lesson. And a perfect example, and this is actually one of my students, everyone out there, I'm sure you can relate to trying to debrief S-turns across the road or S-turns across the breakwater for us Long Beach folks, telling a student, well, you turned too steep here and you didn't turn shallow enough here, 45 minutes later on the ground is totally useless. Showing them this on a ground track is, do you see here where you turn too tight? And I got to tell you, especially ground reference maneuvers, and even steep turns, but primarily the ground reference maneuvers during private pilots, my students learn so much faster because they can see exactly where they are. And for IFR, it's even better. And this is a flight track of a person who took off from Long Beach, got vectored to the ILS Torrance, drove out to the coast. It looks like they did a teardrop hold at Woma. Then they got vectored for the ILS Long Beach. And you notice the ILS for Long Beach procedure is actually overlaid on the map. And it shows you the procedure turn at Becca, and it shows you the localizer. So it's pretty funny to me, especially when I say, by the way, you kind of messed up that hold entry, or you didn't quite get on the Seal Beach radial inbound straight, and the student goes, oh yeah, I did. And I go, well, let's look at the replay. And this is just a static shot. I didn't have time to show a really good movie, but you can overlay this with a G1000 display as well as a Google Earth, and you can even sync the playback with this with the output from a GoPro or a Garmin Verb. You can really send the student home where they can look at this stuff later. And I got to tell you, Cloud Ahoy should just be in every flight instructor's logbook. And the only thing I keep telling Chuck is that they need to charge a whole lot more for it than they do. And then one of the best amazing free resources out there, and Rod and I both really wanted to focus on the free tools that's available to everybody, is the new 1-800-WXBrief.com website.
So tell us the difference between the website and just calling 1-800-WeatherBrief, or as some flight instructors call it, 1-800-VFR not recommended. So,
Rod,
what's the difference, Gary?
I got to tell you, I steal a lot of your jokes when I speak nationally, and that's going to go in my tool bag.
Okay, but I stole that one from my friend Cathay Fish. So.
That's funny. Well, the best authors steal their material. Calling 1-800-WXBrief is the standard way of doing it. However, it's really not effective for student pilots at all because they get a verbal briefing that includes everything. The only good thing about calling the briefer is that they can answer specific questions about the electronic briefing you got before. So I really recommend you get an electronic briefing, read the standard weather briefing, and then call if you have any questions. And the only other advantage to talking to a human briefer, besides being able to ask them questions, is that they will flat out tell you that, this is probably not a good idea. VFR is not recommended, where you don't get that in the electronic. But let me show you some stuff that the website can do that the human briefers cannot do. They actually have a flight plan aid system. Now, this does not create a flight plan, but it makes your flight plans better. Although it will generate a route for you, it's really designed for you to come with your own route and just make it much better. They have next generation briefings. I know all of you have probably had the great joy, or torture as I call it, of printing out a 30-page electronic standard weather briefing from Duot or Duots. And your job then is really to go through with a highlighter and find the 10 things that actually apply to you. This next generation briefing not only shows you everything graphically, it only shows you the stuff that applies to you. Easy activate and easy close. It's been a busy day for me. I live in Big Bear 3 days a week. I had a 10 a.m. appointment with the people from the Flying Aviation Expo in Palm Springs at Palm Springs. Then I needed to be at Chino by 2 o'clock for my student's check ride. And then I needed to be back to the Long Beach airport, get some equipment, and come home to my other home in Anaheim, all in about 8 hours. And there's no other way I could have done that without having an airplane. But the cool thing this Easy Activate, Easy Close does is you can actually activate and close flight plans remotely from your phone. CSAR, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute, and Adverse Conditional Alerting Service. Let's talk about each one just a little bit more in detail. One of the cool things about the flight planning aids is when you pick a flight plan, you put in the time you're going to depart and you click Evaluate, and it actually shows you starting at HDR all the way to wherever you're going, and all along the route, all reporting stations, they'll graphically show you, well, if you take off at 12, it's going to be marginal VFR at the beginning of your route and then IFR all the way down. But if you take off at 9 o'clock, 2100, it's marginal on IFR, but there's some areas of low IFR, and anything gray hatching is showing an adverse condition. So it actually helps you pick the best time of the day to go. Another cool thing is they have a built-in altitude advisor. If you put in the time you're departing and then click Evaluate Altitude, it'll give you a list and show you that for this particular mix, Well, 10,000, which is your pre-selected altitude, will take 8 hours and 32 minutes and burn 47.8 gallons. But you can see down at 6,000 feet, it only takes you 8 hours and 45 gallons. Big word of warning, this does not guarantee terrain clearance because it doesn't do that. It just shows you the best altitude for winds and fuel burn, which is really, really neat. Now, the next generation briefings are what I love. And if you look at all of the tabs across the top, starting with adverse conditions, there's a yellow dot. Now, if you go down below that, you'll notice there's no yellow dot on TFR. There's a yellow dot on closed unsafe NOTAMs, but convective SIGMETs, UUAs, CWA, and severe weather are actually grayed out because there are none within 50 miles of your route. You don't have to scroll through 30 pages. All you have to do to get your legal weather briefing, and a legal weather briefing requires a couple things. The FAA can prove through a computerized track your tail number, your route of flight, and your time, and that you read it. Well, if you click each one of those yellow dots, you're actually completing that. And you're reading, and if you look at the map, mountain obscuration 1 of 1, it's highlighted on your map as a magenta box. So for all of you who've tried to teach airmets, and we kind of have a constant SIGMET, an airmet for moderate turbulence below 12,000 feet that covers like 8 states, and you show the VORs, or they tell the VORs here to here to here on a telephone briefing. Students can't picture that. If you say this airmet starts from 50 miles south of Salinas to 30 miles southwest of Hector to 60 miles south of Thermal, and so on, they actually see this. And that's what makes these things such an amazing teaching tool. Here's another one. They actually show along your route drone operation areas that are reported to them. So you can see very clearly where the drone areas are going to be and if they affect you. Now, that easy activate, easy close, no kidding, it's by text message. I got a text just like this. Use this link to activate your flight plan from here. And you click on that e.afss thing, and it opens up a web page on your phone that says, guess what? Your flight plan has now been activated. So the point of having a flight plan is that you activate it before you take off, and you only close it after you land. Never under any circumstances should you cancel IFR before you land or close a flight plan before you land, because there have been a lot of accident case studies where somebody going into a non-towered area, the radar controller says, well, you can cancel IFR with me in the air or call me on the ground. And pilots think they're doing a favor by saying, well, I can cancel now. Then they crash and kill themselves a half mile short of the runway, and nobody ever knows to look. Never under any circumstances should you cancel IFR services until after you've landed, and never close a flight plan before you land. But same thing, you got to open the flight plan before you go, because what if you have a problem before you get a chance? And especially in busy Bravo airspace, you're trying to get flight following and listen to ATIS. It's kind of hard to call a flight service station in the midst of climbing and following flight paths to open it. So what I do is I actually open all of my flight plans on my cell phone, holding short of a runway by clicking the link, and then after it's open, then I call the tower for clearance. Now, this is one of the best important things for me because I teach and do so much mountain flying. I fly all over the Southwest, and I go to areas where flight following and cell phone service is just not available. And there are devices that actually talk to Lockheed Martin. And my favorite one is called a Spot from Globalstar. I think it's the most affordable, and it runs on AAA batteries. And the cool thing about my Spot when I'm flying is it actually reports my position to Lockheed Martin every 2.5 minutes. Now think about the way a flight plan works to protect you. You take off from Big Bear, California, and you're going north up to a little non-towered area after Sacramento, and you open a flight plan. You crash 30 minutes into the 2-hour flight. 2 hours later, when you're a half hour overdue from closing your flight plan, they will call your cell phone. Well, you're laying there with a broken leg, and you have been for 2 hours, and you can't answer your cell phone. Then they call the airport manager in Sacramento, and they go, no, he's not here. Then they dispatch the Civil Air Patrol to search along your entire 400-mile route. Flight plans are necessary to protect you. Flight following is better, but you can't guarantee it. The cool thing about this Spot device, and there's several, including DeLorme and other companies, but my Spot actually reports to Lockheed Martin the entire time I'm flying, and if the airplane ever stops moving for more than 2 minutes when it's not supposed to, it automatically tells them Gary's got a problem, and if I'm still not moving a couple minutes later, they dispatch rescue services to my exact location. So you can imagine how much quicker you're going to get help. So if you ever do any mountain flying, or I actually just recommend it for everybody who does cross-country flying, this is amazing. And my other favorite thing about it is because I land, in so many desolate areas where I can't even get a cell phone, I actually got it for my family because through the satellite system, as soon as I land, I can send a text to my family, hey, I landed safe, I'll call you later. So my family actually likes it better than I do. Now, they also have some other really cool things, and that's called the Adverse Condition Alerting Service. One of the biggest problems, and I'm sure you've all experienced this, is you get a standard weather briefing 2 hours before you go to the airport, and hey, you're legal. But what if something changes between the time you got the flight briefing and 2.5 hours later when you finish pre-flighting the plane? You'd never know. Well, with Lockheed Martin, you do. And remember, all of this stuff is free. Any critical flight safety changes between briefing and flight, including all the way up until your flight plan is closed, they will send you text and emails about flight restrictions, closed runways, urgent PIREPs, SIGMETs, convective SIGMETs. It's amazing that I flew from Big Bear to Palm Springs this morning, flew from Palm Springs to Chino, and at 2:30, the flight planning system knew that at 4 o'clock I was going to go from Chino back to Long Beach. Well, at 2:30, I'm sitting there with a student. I get a text, hey, there's a new alert for an AirMet for IFR conditions at Long Beach. So I knew what changed, and all the stuff is free.
So the final question for you, Gary, is how do I learn about using 1-800-WEATHER BRIEF?
Well, if you go to pilotsafety.org, click on videos, there's a big column on the left of free videos, including a really good one by a guy named Mike Jesh about how to use this stuff. And it's about a 90-minute recording, and it's free, and I want all instructors to use it and share it with your students exactly how to use all of these cool free services.
Okay, and the second to the last final question would be our basic flight planning skills. Your E6B plotter, paper log, and what have you. Are they still necessary, or have they been replaced by this high technology equipment we have in the cockpit now available to us?
Well, yeah, and I get questioned a lot on that, and thank you, Rod. From day one, private pilots, student pilots, they're using an iPad, but you still have to, and I still teach them all of the basic skills. Because I'm sure you're pretty much all familiar with Murphy's Law. If anything can go wrong, it will. Well, I've got a lot of years flying with iPads, and I found out a couple things about iPads. If you've got this little plotted route going down to El Paso from Tucson, and there's a restricted area north of your route, and there's a U.S. border defense area south of your route, I promise you, every single time you're flying with an iPad, you will get to just about there when your battery goes dead. Or you get the temperature overheat. So I know you're all pretty familiar with Murphy's Law. I'd like you to all share Gary's Law. Your iPad will always turn off when you're close in between restricted airspaces. You have to know the basics. You got to be able to call a weather briefer. You got to be able to use an E6B and a plotter, because every electronic thing will break at some point. You have to have the paper backups.
And so how do you teach flight planning now, given this technology?
Well, I have a pretty basic 6-step program that hopefully some of you all can use. And just as a benefit for everybody on here, this video will be recorded and up on our website under free videos within about 24 hours. And Rod and I will get together and record again with some of the glitches, some on my end and some poor Rod's mic's removed. But you can review all this stuff on pilotsafety.org starting in about 24 hours. Give me a little leeway. Again, and my basic 6-step process to teach flight planning is this. 1, student does the e-online course from Rod Machado, Basic Cross-Country Flight Planning Techniques. Then, I as a CFI or one of my instructors gets together and does a 3-hour ground lesson where we actually plan a short, over 50-mile cross-country flight. Then we get 2 weather briefs. We actually get the graphical next generation briefing, and then I have them call the briefer if they have any questions. I actually don't answer the questions. If they say, well, Gary, what's this abbreviation mean? I go, well, I don't know. And I get them in the habit from day one of calling 1-800-WX-BRIEF and asking the briefer, hey, I'm flying through Tulsa, Oklahoma today, and I've never seen the abbreviation TSA FCW. And the briefer will go, oh, that's thunderstorms in the area, be caution of flying cows. Oh, okay, well, thanks. So I get them in the habit from day one of using these resources to answer the questions. Then we finish the flight plan with the reported winds aloft. Only then do I do an electronic flight plan, either on 1-800-WXBrief.com or 4Flight or FlyQ or WingX. And you know what's amazing, folks? This is a huge confidence builder for the student, because what they found out is that the iPads and the electronic flight planning tools are very, very close, and it boosts their confidence immensely. I will tell you, the electronic flight programmings are always more accurate because they can do things to decimal points you can't do on a manual E6B, but it proves to them that they really are capable of doing this. The first time we fly that cross country, I make them do it with paper only. Then I fly the same cross country the next day using the iPad, and it shows them how much easier the iPad really is. If you need help with any stuff that we've covered tonight, wander on over to pilotsafety.org. That's our volunteer group. And if you click on the Ask the Experts button, you can ask some really amazing experts questions anytime for free. And our only ever complaint about that is we don't get enough questions. So please, instructors, send your students there. There's a lot of free safety stuff. But no kidding, you can talk to 3 different master instructors, a aviation attorney, a senior medical examiner, an actual FAA rep, and you can get questions answered anytime you want for free. Couple qualifiers: give us a day or two, and no, we don't know when they're going to get rid of the 3rd-class medical, so please stop asking. So just click that button. If you enjoyed this webinar, I'm teaching another one tomorrow, all about surviving SoCal Bravo airspace. And you can sign up for that on pilotsafety.org. On the home page, on the bottom left, are some upcoming classes, and that'll tell you how to register. If you need more information about any of the things we talked about today, Rod Machado has a really amazing aviation learning center with, again, a bunch of free CFI tools at rodmachado.com. Of course, you can always go to our website as well, pilotsafety.org. Also, we recommend boldmethod.com. AOPA has the Air Safety Foundation, and the resources the AOPA have are amazing. And Rod, do you want to talk a little bit about the AOPA stuff?
You bet. AOPA and the Air Safety Institute has, those folks have a tremendous amount of useful information, e-learning courses, and of course the database of knowledge articles is well, it's unparalleled. So, if you want to look for information, search for information, AOPA and AOPA flight training, those are the places where you want to go. So, a valuable resource.
And if you don't know, AOPA will give a free 6-month membership to all of their things on the website and the actual printed magazine, Flight Training. They give a free 6-month subscription to any student pilot. And there are several other companies like Flying and Airfax Journal that all have great articles. But I strongly recommend that everybody go to AOPA.com. There's also 1-800-WXBrief.com. They have some free videos and some tutorials. And of course, there's the cloudahoy.com. We're going to take just a few minutes. We're just a few minutes over the 90 minutes. We're going to spend maybe 5 or 6 minutes, as long as Rod or I can continue talking, and answer some questions. You feel free to log off at any time. This will be in the recorded version. We're only going to be able to answer just a few more questions. If we don't answer your questions, please submit them on the Ask the Experts button on pilotsafety.org. So let me scroll
And
to the question.
by the way, they can always email me on Facebook, Rod Machado, or they can email me through my website, and I answer all my email. I get quite a bit of it, so it takes me a while sometimes to get to questions, but I do have a track record, I think, of about 99.5% success rate with answering questions, so at least being able to answer the question.
I'm glad, and people, when you submit a question to Rod directly on his Facebook page, not only will he answer it, but oftentimes, if it's okay with you, he'll publish the question and the answer for other people as well. So,
Exactly.
Rod, this is actually one for you from Douglas Cheney. Doug wants to know, what role can non-certified desktop flight simulators, and I usually think of something like Microsoft Flight Sim, have in flight training?
Yeah, a very, very big role. As a matter of fact, certification when it comes to desktop flight simulators, basic ATDs, is irrelevant. Irrelevant in terms of the building flight time, logging simulator time, things like that. The Navy ROTC program, well, the Navy, for their ROTC program at several locations throughout the United States, used Microsoft Flight Simulator as a training tool to help their students learn about flying. And several studies, well, these are anecdotal studies, but several programs have been done, and I can confirm this with every bit of empirical evidence that I've seen so far. Students learn far more efficiently in actual flight training if they take the lessons that I created in Microsoft Flight Simulator. And I do exactly what any other flight instructor would do. I teach basic stick and rudder skills as best I can in the flight simulator. So they are very valuable references and are very valuable resources. And for $20, you buy the Flight Sim X, and you don't really need rudder pedals, although I recommend that you get them if you can. And then you have the student practice what he or she is learning on every flight, as well as taking those flight lessons, because again, I teach basic through those lessons on flight sim basic stick and rudder skills. And one other thing, the fact is that talking on the radio is very frightening for most people and for most new students, probably for some advanced pilots too. And you can activate the interactive ATC a portion on Microsoft Flight Sim, which gives you the ability to work with, let's say, amateur air traffic controllers that mimic real-life air traffic controllers, and this is an excellent way to gain the comfort that you need talking to air traffic control. So it's absolutely should be an indispensable part for every lesson. One last thing, go to the CFI discussion group forum on Facebook and scroll down, and I asked a question about training rudder and aileron usage in the landing flare, and I discussed something called SUBURI training, SUBURI training, and you'll be able to find a link to an article, or just email me and I'll send you the link. And that is a special type of training that can be done in Microsoft Flight Simulator that helps accelerate learning and behavior acquisition and change.
That's awesome, Rod. I've used Microsoft Flight Training for years, or Microsoft Flight Simulator for years when I was a new instrument instructor. And no, it didn't give you credit, but let me tell you, students learn so much more as long as they've learned the good habits first. They make a huge difference. Now, Rich, you've got Rich Gross. Hi, Rich. Has a question, and it's, I think, important for everybody, but the answer can be fairly simple. Rich wants to know, what would you do or suggest if a student says they don't want to do any ground training at all with the CFI for financial or other reasons, that they'll just handle all of it at home? And I have a real simple, flat answer. I don't accept them as a student, because I tell them before they ever go on a demo flight the importance of ground training. Now, I tell them, look, I'm going to charge you $80 an hour for all 3 hours. The difference is if you do all your homework at home, the ground session in the beginning is 40 minutes. You go pre-flight, or you pre-flight before you get there, before I get there, which is even better. We're going to spend an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes in the plane, and then we're going to do a 40-minute debrief while most of your time is spent flying. If you show up, however, and you've not done the homework and you can't prove that to me by turning in quizzes and me asking questions, then we're not going to fly at all, and we're going to do the whole 3-hour flight, the whole 3-hour lesson on the ground. So it's very expensive, but people who say, I want no ground training at all, I actually refuse to train, because one of two things is going to happen. They either don't have the money to complete flight training, or my big concern is that right there is showing me they don't have the proper regard for safety. Here's one for Rod. Rod, have you ever spent time reviewing available resources like the King, Jeppesen, Cessna, and FAA-created lesson libraries, which also contain resources?
Yes, I'm familiar with the King's program, and I'm familiar with Sporties, and I've not sat through and looked at all of them, but I have enough experience with them, and they're superb. I mean, those folks are pros. They do great work. So, I mean, you have Richard Collin at Sporties, and you have quite a few other great folks there, and they have John and Martha with their programs. So anything that they offer, those are great resources. My programs are just a little different in the sense that what I do is I use humor as a behavior modification tool, and I try to schedule it through properly, sequentially throughout all my periodicals, so that it keeps people interested, and I do tend to answer the question why, to provide motivational support for understanding. Why for everything? Why does controlled airspace start at 700 feet? Why does it start at Class C at 700 feet, Class C at 1,200 feet, 14,500 feet for other types of Class C? So there are answers for those, and they're all in my books.
Absolutely. I will tell you, when I was learning to fly, that I bought every DVD, audio program, book thing I could find. And, my private pilot training was the Rod Machado handbook, DVDs from Sporties, DVDs from King, DVDs on the flight maneuvers from Jeppesen. Like, I bought everything I could. And sometimes it honestly just comes down to personal preference. I think that the Rod Machado stuff is just funny, and I enjoy that. But I agree with you that they're all really good products. So let me read through a couple questions. This is from Ron Bear. Not really a question, but a comment. My CFIs, when using iPad teaching for flight, have done a great job of training themselves by going to local seminars and using DVD programs like we sell on Pilot Safety. So that's a great point. You really can do guided self-study on this, but what he's saying is they've trained themselves by going to classes. And a lot of people are saying, thank you, great job, all that. And we love all you guys too. I just can't acknowledge all of them. Um, Let me just scroll. There's so many here. Um, how does again, Natasha, I need to send you a T-shirt for being the most active person. How does 1-800-WXBrief.com compare to my favorite Duots? Duots does not have any of the enhanced features, but is great about giving a standard flight plan. I will tell you that Duot, D-U-A-T, is no longer going to be a certified vendor. And if you all don't know, Flight Watch 122.0 has been eliminated starting October 1st. So FlightWatch 122.0 and Duot are both out of service starting in October, and it's just a matter of efficiency and cost quick. Okay, let me go through a couple here. And Ron says the nice thing about these programs is it also lets you track your students on solos. I stock all of my students on FlightAware, or I send them with my spot, and I can actually watch live. Zoan, I'm sorry I mess up names. If I don't have data or cell service at my destination, can I still close my flight plan by calling on the airport land? Oh yeah, no, absolutely. You can always close your flight plan by calling them. Let's scroll through just a couple more here. Rod, the question is from Bruce. Hi, Bruce. Are either of you thinking about publishing a book guide article for CFIs that integrate the new tools, methods that you've discussed? And Rod, I'm just going to put you on the spot in front of a couple hundred people. And would you be interested in maybe working together on something like that?
Gary, I would be very interested. If you could find me some more time, that would be great. You make the time machine, I'll work with you on anything. As it stands right now, I can barely, I can barely hold my own with the courses I'm working on. But of course, I would be very happy to work with you
Well,
on anything.
so if everybody on the program, either live or watching the DVD or a free online video, if everyone will contribute $3, we can probably get Rod a faster airplane, and we can create that time. Rob Bennett has a great question. Rod, do you have any upcoming talks scheduled?
I do. I'm going to be at Anoka, the AOPA fly-in Minneapolis, St. Paul, in 3 days. So if you're in that particular area, AOPA weekend fly-in, listen, do not miss those. They are a tremendous amount of fun. Oh my gosh. AOPA did a great thing. Yeah, some people like and really miss the expos and summits, and me too. But these programs being conducted around the country are allow more people to attend. And believe me, you will have a tremendous amount of fun. I can't wait to go. So it'll be a lot of fun. As far as other programs, September 16th in Palomar, I'll be doing at Palomar, that'll be KCRQ. I'll be doing a program for the Palomar Pilot Association on handling in-flight emergencies, limited seating, 50 seats. And I think it's a small program, so sign up early.
Great. And Warren, thanks for letting me know. There's a typo on the screen, folks. Remember, it's aopa.org, not com, and that's my
Yes,
fault.
indeed it is. Yes.
Uh, Let me see. Just going to go through as many. Um, I think it's just kind of hard to scroll through a lot of this stuff. Folks, if we didn't get to your question tonight, I know I'm kind of tired, and I'm sure Rod is as well. If we didn't get to your question, email Rod directly, or you can go to pilotsafety.org. Use that Ask the Experts feature. If you got a question for Rod, I promise you I'll forward it. Y'all, I want to thank you so much for showing a dedication to safety. Rod, thank you so much for being here.
And thank you, Gary, for your wisdom and experience, and also for the audience spending their night listening to a program like this. And I hope that they're all not spending the night listening to this kind of program because they can't dance. But I hope they're all spending the time because they of course wanted to, as I know they are, because they wanted to learn. So glad to have you, and hope you learned something.
All right, y'all. You all have a good night. We're going to end now, and we hope to see you online soon.